Thank you to Father O'Reilly and to St. Vita's Church for having us. Our presentation tonight is about our book, Guadalupe and the Flowerwood Prophecy, how God prepared the Americas for conversion before the Lady appeared. We are musicians, and you might be wondering, why would a composer, I'm a composer, and a singer write a book about the beloved Marian apparition, Our Lady Guadalupe? To answer this, we have to tell you how it got started. You see, back in the early 1990s, I was inspired to set to music Aztec flower song poems. I wanted to incorporate them into the Roman Latin Mass. The composition ended up becoming the concert piece Misa Azteca. However, to compose it, I needed to do a lot of research on Aztec flower song poems. And you may be thinking to yourself, wow, I didn't even know the Aztecs wrote poetry. Well, yes, they did. Yeah. So in my research, I discovered that within a few decades after the fall of the Aztec Empire, Franciscan friars collected and transcribed approximately 180 known Aztec song poems from the lips of the indigenous elders. These song poems fall into various genres. However, a significant portion are in the category called flower song poems. Among them, and the most prominent, is an ancient flower song poem entitled The Origin of the Songs, or in the Nahua language, the language of the Aztecs, Cuica Pecayot. Now, what is this song poem about? It tells an incredible story. It's about a singer who is looking for holy, sacred flowers. He asks the butterflies and the hummingbirds to help him find these flowers so that he can put them in his tilma and show them to the lords and princes. These holy, sacred flowers are found in a place called the Flower World Paradise, and it's filled with beauty and music. It's imperative that the singer find these sacred flowers because they are the source of eternal happiness. However, at the end of the poem, the singer doesn't find the flowers, and so he weeps. Now, after reading this song poem, this is back in the early 1990s, I thought to myself, the tilma, the flowers, gathering the flowers in my tilma, this sounds almost identical to the Guadalupe story, the encounter with Juan Diego in 1531. So now, can we assume that most of you are familiar with the Guadalupe story and Juan Diego? Okay, great. Okay, so that story is also known as the Nican Mopoa. But we will review a few of the key takeaways from the story. Okay, as you can see, Juan Diego's looking for flowers. Guadalupe shows Juan Diego where the flowers. He shows the flowers to the bishop, etc., etc. Juan Diego completes the quest. Now let's look at the similarities, and we're going to go into a big analysis of this, but look at the ancient flower song poem and the Nican Mopoa. They're almost identical, the key plot points. So these are commonalities, but there's even many more, which make the connection between the two undeniable. However, the main difference in the story, and this is crucial, is that the singer didn't enter the flower world paradise and didn't find the flowers. In the Nican Mopoa, Juan Diego does enter the flower world paradise, and he finds the flowers. Is there a deeper meaning to this? We will dive into this much later. So returning back to my composer story in the early 1990s, I was puzzled about this obvious connection, especially as a cradle Catholic and a person who actually went to Our Lady of Guadalupe Elementary School, and who even has a grandma named Guadalupe. I didn't even know that this earlier story even existed. I'd never heard of this song poem. It was only because I was writing this piece of music that I even learned about it. Unfortunately, when I did some research about it, I found out that secular scholars assumed that this earlier song poem was the basis for a fabricated, that is made up Guadalupe story. Kind of makes sense, right? In order to dupe the indigenous into converting to Catholicism. Made sense to me. I believed it, and it pretty much lost my faith. So that changed in 2009 when I met my future wife, and I showed her this flower song poem. There's a story behind it, is because that piece I wrote was going back to Carnegie Hall, and I wanted to rewrite it, and I was busy working on a movie, and I just said, can you go through this book and try to find some good poetry that I can set to music? And I totally forgot about that first poem sounding just like Guadalupe. So I hand you the book, and what was your reaction?
Well, you know, of course, I was shocked. You know, at that point in time, I thought I knew everything about Our Lady Guadalupe, because the preceding years I started researching a lot of stuff, but I'd never come across a Catholic book that mentioned anything about the song poem. And then to find out that the scholars are saying, well, this is the basis for the Guadalupe story, and they're kind of giving it seemingly a good argument for that. But what's interesting about discovering all of this was that it did get a 14-year-long conversation going on with Joseph and I that we call our marvelous obsession. So we started researching every paper and book that talked about the country and the cultures and the history. And over time, it evolved. I mean, if you want to take a look at the back of our book, there's a 17-page bibliography, and it kind of gives a snapshot of what we were researching. But at the end of it, what we discovered was an alternative conclusion, that far from finding more evidence of it being a fabrication, there's actually some hard evidence proving otherwise.
So how do we explain the connection between these two documents? Well, what we discovered is that if you look at the story content, the plot points, they conveyed a message of salvation. The singer's desire to find the beautiful, holy, sacred flowers in a flower world paradise and place them in his tilma, a desire that Juan Diego, a baptized Christian, fulfilled, metaphorically represented the hope of ancient Mesoamerican man to find redemption in a fallen world. The key were these flowers. What did they represent? Well, we're going to find out. The flowers mean ultimate truth. So what happens is that these two stories merge into one story of paradise lost, transformed into a paradise gained. So now we get to the thesis of our book, and it has to do with an area called Preparatio Evangelica, the way in which God implants concepts and ideas into cultures so that when the gospel message gets to them, they already have a foundation for it. This happened all throughout the pagan world. Guadalupe, in the decade after her appearance, is the largest conversion event in the history of the world. 8 to 10 million people converted. It dwarfs the patristic era and the apostolic era, people were converted by the thousands. So why would evangelical preparation not occur here in the Americas? So this is what we're saying. What most people know about Guadalupe is usually the story, the tilma, and the conversion of millions. Well, this is only part 2. There's a whole other part 1. And this part 1 forms a grand meta-narrative which lasts about 3,000 years. So part 1 deals in 2 academic areas. One of them is called Flower World, and the other one is called Nahua philosophy, which is, as we're going to be seeing, is expressed in these flower song poems. Now, this grand meta-narrative lasts about 3,000 years, but it shows how God prepared the people of Mesoamerica for their Christian conversion. So let's get into part 1. Let's get into the ancient Mesoamerican world and flower world. What is flower world?
Okay, so flower world is an ancient indigenous belief in a spiritual floral afterlife realm saturated with beauty, music, energy, and creativity. It's bursting with life, it's intense colors, it's intoxicating aromas and scents, and it's filled with different kinds of flowers, birds, and non-threatening animals, and everything is glowing, everything's sparkling, and everything is singing. So it's simultaneously giving off light and music. And we know about this, and it started in 1992 with a paper written by a linguist and anthropologist by the name of Jane Hill. And what she discovered in the process of collecting and gathering the song poems of the American Southwest and those of Mesoamerica, and very specifically the ancient Aztec song poems, she discovered that all of these groups that are seemingly unrelated are singing about this floral paradisal domain. And so the way she coined it at that point, she called it generically flower world. From that point in time, over the last 20 to 30 years, multiple academics have created an interdisciplinary field of study, and it's composed of archaeologists, anthropologists, forensic scientists, and many, many more, which I'm not including. But they've all used her thesis to not only explain, but even reinterpret their understanding of archaeological ruins that are scattered throughout Mesoamerica. And what they discovered along with that is that the origins of this belief system can be found with the Olmec, which is considered the mother culture of the Americas, and they can date it at the very least, the belief system, to 1500 BC, that's before Christ, right? So from 3,500 years ago, the most common image that's tied to this belief system is the four-petaled flower, and you'll see it everywhere. You'll find it on murals, pottery shards, on altars, and on tombs and statuary. For instance, what you're seeing up on the screen right now, it's actually a 6-foot-tall image in Guatemala at an archaeological ruin, but it's not the only one. You'll pretty much see it everywhere. And scholars believe this four-petaled flower, it's the representation of something called the axis mundi. Now, I'm not familiar if you know that term, but basically the axis mundi is the world axis. And a good way of understanding it is that it's the place where heaven and earth meet. So a lot of cultures have a concept of the axis mundi, but here in Mesoamerica, the way it works is that the horizontal plane that we all know, which represents our known universe, the north, south, east, and west, that's the horizontal area. And then the vertical axis that reaches up through the center, it connects directly to other dimensions, outside of this reality. So the way the Mesoamerican people understood that four-petaled flower is they're kind of making the statement, through the beauty of a flower, one can attain or rise up into this flower world paradise. So they superimpose those four petals on that axis mundi, what I was just mentioning, the north, south, east, and west, and each of the petals represents one of those directions. But the center point of that flower, how that works is that a vertical axis reaches through the center of the flower into this floral domain. This domain that's filled with beauty. It's filled with light. It's filled with flowers, very specifically, and everything singing. So, as another example, what you're seeing up there, it's a Mayan tomb. It's at Tikal, and it has a four-petal flower over the passageway that's below. So basically what it's communicating to the people in that time period is that that four-petal flower is highlighting the passageway to the flower world paradise. So you can actually get there. It's acting like a portal. That's one way of understanding it. And what's really great is that this idea is extended to Teotihuacan. I don't know if you're familiar with Teotihuacan, but it's located about 45 miles northwest of Mexico City. It's a pretty ancient city. It's going back to about 250 BC to about 600 AD. And what's interesting is that the pyramids at Teotihuacan, initially archaeologists thought, oh, they're probably tombs, right? But when they went to the process of excavating them, they discovered that they're not tombs. They have tunnels running specifically under the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, and they're run in an east-west direction, right? But as they go into it, it ends up into the center of the pyramid, where there's a 4-chambered cave in the shape of a 4-petaled flower. So if we take Jane Hill's thesis from back in 1992 and you apply it over here, that's what archaeologists are doing, and they're reinterpreting the pyramids at Teotihuacan as physical representations of the Axis Mundi. Those 4-petaled flowers that are beneath the center of each pyramid, therefore, they're acting as portals. So if you can imagine taking a tunnel in an east-west direction into the pyramid, you get into the center, they're thinking this is going to be the place where the soul kind of rise up into this flower world paradise. And what's great is right near the Temple of the Sun, you have a mural that's actually illustrating this whole idea. If you can see, there's people in the center and they're going up. They have confirmed that they're going up and not going down. And they're they're being pulled up into this floral spiritual domain. That's singing, that's glowing. And if you take that idea, what's very interesting about it, and going back to Jane Hill's thesis, this flower world paradise has different names among all the different groups, right? So as an example, the Hopi, which is not too far away, they called it Si'itapulva, but in the Nahuatl language, it's called in Xochitlalpan and Tonacatlalpan. And what's really fun about this is the actual terminology that St. Juan Diego gave in the very beginning of the Guadalupe narrative.
All right. So now we go from the ancient world and we move into the Nahua period, which is around 600 AD. And we see that many of these ancient flower world ideas carry over into this period, and we see them primarily in flower song poems. But first, who are the Nahua? Well, the Nahua were diverse groups of people who migrated from northern Mexico and the American Southwest into central Mexico, primarily around Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico. They were united by a common language, Nahuatl, which was the language through which Guadalupe and Juan Diego communicated. It's also the language of the most famous group, the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs lived in a place called Tenochtitlan. The Aztec Empire started around 1428 when they defeated the previous empire known as the Tepenac Empire. And they established their city, which is characterized by sophistication and order, as you can see. Note the causeway leading to the pyramid that's in the center of the city, which was dedicated to their war god, Huitzilopochtli, in 1487. And we'll get to that in just a second. However, the Aztecs had an alliance with another group. This was a group which would have been second in power alongside the Aztecs. They were known as the Texcocans, and they lived in Texcoco. Despite their shared alliance, however, the Aztecs and the Texcocans had held vastly different perspectives on the world. Whereas the Aztec believed they had this cosmo-mythology that allowed them to subjugate everybody around them, the Texcocans carried on flower world traditions. So the Texcocans were known for the making of beautiful things, such as painting or the arranging of beautiful feathers, and the composing of flower song poems. In fact, the king of Texcoco, his name was Nezahualcóyotl, or Hungry Coyote. He was renowned as a warrior poet king, and he composed a lot of flower song poems, and he encouraged many of the other poet kings of these different areas to continue on the flower world traditions. Now, just to give you a stark contrast of what was going on as we start getting closer to the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521. In 1487, in Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs were sacrificing people, humans, by the tens of thousands. In fact, at the dedication of the temple that we were just showing you in the center of the city, in a 5-day period, 80,000 human sacrifices occurred. In contrast, in another city not that far away, it's called Huechoncinco, the Poet Kings held a poets conference. And it's recorded. And it talks about what they were talking about. And what did they talk about? They were talking about existential ideas. They were saying, how do I know I'm not dreaming right now? How do I know what is reality? And then they said, wait a minute, what are the aspects of truth? Can truth change? If truth changes, as it does on earth, is it actually real? So therefore, truth must exist in another dimension, a place where truth and things don't change. And they called this place the Flower World Paradise. And the flowers of truth come from the flowers of paradise, the Flower World Paradise. So what they did as poet kings is they sing the flowers down to earth. And it's so beautiful how they interchange in their poetry flowers with songs and flowers with truth. And one of the primary metaphors that you find in these flower song poems is the singer, the warrior king poet, calling down the flowers so he can put them in his tilma and he could show them to the people on the earth. Over and over again, you hear these warriors who are about to go to war saying, I hope I find the truth. I hope I see these flowers. I hope I can enter into the flower world paradise. So what they were doing was making a connection, as we saw in ancient times, of the four-petaled flower that comes from the flower world paradise. Now, they grappled extensively with death and life after death, especially because popularly it was assumed that warriors, women who died in childbirth, and nobles were the only ones that could enter the flower world paradise. Well, in a lot of these poems, they're saying, is this really true? So anyway, because another point of this is that the common people, they would say, would go to this dreary underworld called Mictlan. So we see this poignant cry of the singer poets wanting to come into this flower world paradise. And who else resided there? A one supreme God, referred to as in Tloquenahuaque, the God of far and near. The king of Texcoco wrote extensively about this attributes of a one supreme God. They had music schools where these song poems that were written by these wise men were memorized, and they would sing these songs out in the open air. So it was like the people were philosophizing in the plazas. Now these song poems would travel throughout the land, and they were known by all. And these were long song poems that, when they were written down, would go on for pages. But it's kind of like Hotel California, right? That's long. I bet most of you could probably sing the whole song from memory. But there was a lot of analogies to that. Everybody kind of knew it, and they could recite it. And it was probably the Guicapecayot because of its name. It's either called the origin of the songs, the beginning of the songs, or the principle of the songs, is why many of these scholars think that it was very, very important, the narrative that we were just talking about. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to really dive into this poem. In fact, Monique is going to read it for you, is going to interpret it. I put some music behind it, If you were a Nahua back in that time, you would have heard it performed with drums and a flute, and even dancers. They would reinterpret this narrative. But to kind of get you in the mood, we put some modern day score to it. So here we go. The Cuica Pecayo.
I ponder within my heart, where will I gather the holy fragrant flowers? Who will I ask? I truly desire to ask the Honorable Golden Hummingbird, the Honorable Jade Hummingbird. I wish to ask the Trupio Butterfly. Truly, they know where blossom the holy fragrant flowers. I wander here through the forest of Trogon birds. I truly desire to wander through the forest of roseate swans and flowers. There they may be gathered, with dew glowing with sunlight. There they blossom. Perhaps I will see them there. If they show them to me, I will fill my tilma, and with them I will greet the nobles. With them I will make the lords happy. Ah, here they live. I hear their flower song, the mountains echo them. Ah, they are beside the flowing paradise spring of the turquoise to Katinga bird. There your songs are hurled, your songs reverberate, and the mockingbird echoes the jingle bellbird. And the twitter of birds is spread out, the multitude of precious songbirds. And there they praise world owner. They fill one's voice with true song. I was saying, I was yelling in sorrow. I cause you sorrow, his precious ones. And immediately they fell silent. And then comes the Honorable Golden Hummingbird. Whom do you seek, noble singer? Immediately I respond, I say, where are the holy fragrant flowers with which I will relieve the sorrow of your beloved companions? Soon they will sing to me. Truly they're here. Let's go show them to you, singer. Truly with them you will make them happy. And within the mountain, the flower world paradise, Tonacatlalpan, Xochitlalpan, it led me. It took me to enter where the dew spread out in glittering splendor. And there I saw a multitude of precious fragrant flowers, precious delicious flowers, clothed with the dew scattered around in rainbow glory. And there they said to me, cut many flowers, whichever ones you will want, and be happy, singer. And when you arrive, you'll give them to our friends, the lords and princes, so they will give joy to the world owner. So I gathered in my tilma the various fragrant flowers, delicate scented, delicious. And I said, may some of our people enter here. May very many of us be here. And I thought, I should go forth to announce to our friends that here all of us should rejoice in the different lovely odorous flowers, and that we should call the various sweet holy songs with which we might rejoice our friends here on earth, and the eagle and jaguar princes in their grandeur and dignity. Indeed, I, the singer, was saying, I flower crowned the princes, I adorned them, and I filled their hands with flowers. And then I raised a pure and holy song, glorifying the nobles before the face of the God of far and near. But where would one whose worth is nothing get them? Where will one find the delicious flowers? Could one be accompanied to the flower world paradise in Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan, who is nothing, afflicted and who sins on earth? Indeed, it is the God of far and near, in Tloque Nawake, who makes one worthy here on earth. And so my heart weeps as I remember going there to look about in the flower world paradise, Xochitlalpan, I the singer, and I said, a bad place is this earth. Certainly it is elsewhere in the hereafter where there is true joy. For what good is this earth? Truly, there is another life in the hereafter. I wish to go there. I wish to sing amongst the multitude of precious birds. I wish to enjoy the holy flowers, the fragrant flowers, the ones that please the heart. For only their intoxicating fragrance makes one happy. Their fragrance intoxicates. Only their intoxicating fragrance makes one happy. Their fragrance intoxicates.
All right. Thank you, Monique. So what does this song poem mean? What is his underlying message? That man resides in a fallen world and fervently seeks the truth of life and existence, manifested in his quest to discover the holy, sacred flowers. These flowers of truth, which he must find and possess within his tilma, serves as the key to unlocking eternal happiness for him and all of mankind in the flower world paradise. Regrettably, his unworthiness prevents him from finding them. However, the God of far and near in Nahua can make him worthy of finding the flowers and living with his Creator for all eternity in the flower world paradise. For thus there is hope. Now the singer failed in his quest to find the flowers. Thus, he's a failed hero. And as a representative of all Mesoamerican man, the story cries out for a victorious hero who will one day find the flowers. It's like a 1,000-year-old cliffhanger, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to show you not point by point, but the big ones, how the Guadalupe event fulfills this story. But first, the Aztec Empire falls to the Spanish in 1521. And then in 1524, just 3 years later, the arrival of the Franciscans occurs, and they attempt to evangelize the indigenous. However, as we're going to see, it doesn't go that well.
So as Joseph was just saying, they weren't hugely successful. Of course, they came to evangelize the indigenous. And while they had a few adult baptisms in the very beginning, Juan Diego was one of them. As a general rule, the adults were not convinced. And there's a few reasons for that. On top of that, the Franciscans didn't know the language, they didn't know the customs, they didn't know about Flower World, they didn't know about Flower Mountain. And in addition to that, there was a very deep scandal of what was occurring with the conquistadors who were professed Christians. They were doing some very harsh things. We won't go into too much detail, but as a general rule, the indigenous were looking at all of that and just saying, oh, is this really something I want to become a part of? But there's also two indigenous concepts that are really kind of key as to why it didn't work. In addition to that, this is on an ideological level. The first word we're going to introduce is the Nahua word Nelly. It means rooted. But let me take a step back. I kind of gave it away. The word for truth is Nelly, but it also means rooted. So the basic idea is that in order for them to consider something true, it had to be rooted in their culture. They weren't going to accept anything that wasn't rooted in their culture. And the second word is Yanquique, which means new. But it also means false or immoral. So the two words coming together is kind of conveying the idea that anything new that's going to be introduced to them that's not rooted in their culture, they're just not going to pay any attention to, because they've been taught for centuries that we know what's true, we know what the traditions are, and anything outside of that we just can kind of ignore. So this manifests itself in a lot of the practices the Franciscans were trying to pull them away with, like polygamy, like idolatry. They had hundreds of idols. Even the ones who did convert, you would see instances of them having Jesus mixed in with all the other idols. They just considered it one among many. You know, they had slavery. It was a huge economic thing. Marriage, that was also economic. So they'd have multiple wives and children, and all together, these were their workers. So it generated income. They weren't going to pull them away from that. So by the end of 1529, 1530, it's so bad that Bishop Zumarraga, who will later play a role in the Guadalupe narrative, he actually writes an extensive letter to the king in Spain. And he directly expresses, and I'll quote it to you so you can see how intense it was. These are his words. I consider it proper to inform your majesty of what is now taking place, for it is a matter of such great importance, were it not for divine intervention to provide an immediate remedy, this land stands on the brink of being lost forever. Everything is spiraling towards the abyss. So in his mind, he's conveying, we can't do anything. We can't overcome this. And in general, maybe they should just pack up and go home. So this is the state of Mesoamerica right before she shows up.
Okay, so now it's December 9th, 1531. And at this point in history, the European Christian missionaries and their ideas seem miles apart from the indigenous way of seeing the world. As you can see, the Nahua had a highly sophisticated and well-ordered society. They were not pushovers. They were not just going to easily believe something. It had to make sense to them. It had to be something even perhaps that they knew that the Franciscan missionaries didn't know anything about. Something that had to be God obviously speaking directly to them. So on the morning of December 9th, however, it didn't look like that was going to happen at all. But with God, all things are possible. So now we're going to go through the key points in the Nicomopora, the Guadalupe story, and show you how they gently carry from Nahua indigenous culture to Christian ideas. So let's start with the beginning of the story. It's now December 9th, 1531, and Juan Diego is about to take a 14-mile walk to Mass. And he passes Tepeyac Hill and he hears music playing. So we're just barely into line 8 of the story. And he hears singing coming from the hill, from many different precious birds. It's as if the mountains echo them. Now, there are multiple instances where you see lines in Nahuatl that look like they were cut and pasted, to use computer lingo, from one to the other. I mean, they're identical. So he wanders into this place, and it sounds just like the flower worlds of ancient myth. In fact, this passage brings up the jingle bell bird and the trogon bird, the exact two species of birds that are mentioned in the previous song poem. What are the chances? Seeming like it sounds like the ancient flower world. And however, what's interesting is that we're going from the world of myth into the world of reality. What was professed in myth for thousands of years is now happening to a real person named Juan Diego, a real person living in a real time and place. Now, to seal the deal that there's a definite connection between the old flower world and now where Juan Diego finds himself, Juan Diego says, he stops himself and he says, by any chance am I worthy? Have I deserved what I hear? Perhaps I'm only dreaming it. Perhaps I'm only dozing it. Now, why would he bring up worthiness now? Mm-hmm. Now, the only reason why is because we could see where the previous story ends. It ends on the question of worthiness. The singer was not worthy to enter the flower world paradise. but suddenly Juan Diego, as a commoner, find themselves in a place that sounds and looks just like the description of the flower of paradise, and he asked himself the question, am I worthy to be even seeing this? I'm not supposed to be here. And even perhaps as the story is being related to the Nahua audience, the Nahua, who once again know the story, know the concept behind it, they may also be saying, wait a minute, why is Juan Diego there? Why is he being placed in this place at this part of the story? So, but yet here he is. Now once again, to seal the deal, Juan Diego says, where am I? Where do I find myself? Is it possible that I'm in the place our ancient ancestors, our grandparents told about? He's actually referring back to something that his ancient grandparents knew about. In fact, as we brought up at the very beginning of our talk when we talked about Flower World, these concepts go way back. In fact, they go back to the cradle of American civilization, the Olmec period. And then to seal the deal any further, he names it exactly the same name that you find in the flower song poems. In Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan. In fact, that exact phrase is mentioned in the earlier song poem because it's the place that the singer could not go to. In Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan. The place that the Olmecs were talking about, that the Maya, the Teotihuacan, all the song poems during the Nahua period, they were all talking about this same place. And Juan Diego brings it up and names it by name at the very beginning of the Guadalupe story. Once again, what are the chances? This is the place of ultimate truth, the place of ultimate beauty. And the singer poets have been longing to go to this place for millennia. But what made Juan Diego worthy? What was different about him? He was a baptized Christian. Maybe that has something to do with it. Okay, so what's interesting here is that we're seeing a description, an afterlife that is rooted in Nahua tradition. It's Nelly. It's truth, but it's also rooted. It's not Yanquic, meaning that it's not a new concept, and therefore it's immoral. So gently, these two concepts, Nahua concepts and Christian concepts, form a bridge of understanding. This is just point number one. Now he meets the Virgin of Guadalupe, and she speaks to him and she identifies herself. And she says, "Know, be sure, my dearest and youngest son, that I am the perfect, ever Virgin, Holy Mary, Mother of." Now she uses 5 different descriptors of a one supreme God. But we're just going to focus in on one. She says that I am the mother of the God of far and near in Tloque Nahuaque. Do you remember that name? That's the name of the one supreme God, King Hungry Coyote of the Texcocans, the one that he wrote a lot about. And not only that, it's mentioned in line 28 of the Cuicapecayot as the one who makes you worthy. So if you put these concepts together, and if you knew about this concept, essentially the Virgin Blessed Mother is saying, I am the mother of the God of far and near, the one who makes you worthy to enter the flower world paradise. That's what she's saying. And the Nahua, we believe, would have understood that. This idea of a one supreme God that could be reached through the 4-petaled flower, that portal that you see in the pyramids, the portal that you see on that big 6-foot 4-petaled flower that's carved on the side of a mountain in Guatemala. These were the connections that the Mesoamerican man had been yearning for thousands of years. But right now, another bridge has gently been crossed. What the Franciscan missionaries were trying to tell the people about the Christian God has now been met with the concept that was already deeply ingrained in their Nahua culture. So let's move forward with the story. So our hero needs to go through many obstacles in order to do what the Virgin Mary wants him to do, which is initially to build a temple at Tepeyac. But even the bishop's Nahua servants don't believe him, and they threaten physical harm. But near the end of the story, and we're going quickly through that, is that the bishop needs a sign to believe that Juan Diego is telling the truth. But what's interesting here is by the bishop asking for that sign, which eventually turned into the flowers, as we know, he's setting in motion the ancient quest. He's setting it up. And we mentioned so many other things in our book, but we're trying to limit our talk time-wise. But there are so many other things, like the path of the sun. You know how Juan Diego goes to the other side of the hill? He ends up going in an east to west direction, following the path of the sun, which is the way in which so many of these cities, the pyramids of Teotihuacan, are all aligned in an east to west direction, implying that you could only reach the flower world paradise from an east to west direction. And what are the chances that is the direction that Juan Diego is set when he goes to the flower of paradise and finds the flowers? But that's a tangent. So all things, the morning of December 12th, are all set up. Juan Diego's on the right side of the hill. Guadalupe points to the top of the hill, just like the hummingbird in the old poem, and points him in the direction of where to find the flowers. So you got to be thinking, the Nahua, who've known this Hotel California type song, it's like, are they ever going to get out of Hotel California? Well, that's another story. But they're thinking now, is he actually going to complete this quest? Is he going to find the flowers of truth? So Juan Diego ascends the hill. He gets to the top, and he finds a multitude of fragrant, holy, fragrant flowers. And once again, that phrase in Nahuatl, in Nepapan awiyak yeli awiyak xochitl. That's the exact same phrase that you find in the older song poems. And Juan Diego finds them. So the Nahua, they might have been going, woo, yay, he found them. He got it. He finally finished the quest. But it's more than that. As we said, he found the flowers of ultimate truth that link heaven and earth. He climbs Flower Mountain, the model of Axis Mundi. And Juan Diego, our unlikely hero, fulfills the ancient quest. And by gathering those flowers in his tilma, he metaphorically unlocks the barrier to flower world, salvation. And he goes to the top of the hill, and he finds the multitude of fragrant, beautiful, sacred flowers. He gathers them in his tilma, succeeding where the ancient singer failed. Now, what would this mean to the Nahua? That God himself was speaking to them in their own symbolic language and fulfilling their greatest and most ancient desires. God uses a mythical story bridging over into a Christian reality, and this could only really be explained supernaturally. And I got to tell you, the Franciscan missionaries were clueless. They didn't know this was going on. There are so many quotes that they're referring to the flower song poems, and they're saying, we can't understand a word they're saying. They're nonsensical. And we were talking to a priest the other day, and he said, because there's been so much study about Nahua philosophy in the flower song poems, we probably know more now about the flower song poems than the missionaries in their own time period. We actually know a lot more now, just within the last 50 years, but that's another story. So Juan Diego, a baptized Christian, finds the flowers. The myth has become real, and of course he opens his tilma in front of the bishop, and the miraculous image occurs. Now, the tilma brings us all the way back to the beginning. Okay? The four-petaled flower is placed directly over the womb of Our Lady of Guadalupe. By understanding the symbolism, we can interpret this image in a much more profound way. It's a model of the Axis Mundi. And the Axis Mundi is a portal. We have to remember that ancient Mesoamerican man was trying to take very complicated concepts and trying to turn them into a material representation. So how do you explain other dimensions? Well, in this case we're talking, how do you explain something that's three-dimensional? Well, you do it by different axes. So you have a horizontal plane, you have a y-axis. But when you flip that image on its side, it turns into a two-dimensional image, but you still have to imagine that this y-axis is going through the four-petaled flower even though it's flipped on its side. Okay? And you have to apply that same idea to the tilma. The center of the flower, the axis mundi, is like a wormhole that takes you to eternity, that takes you to ultimate beauty, to ultimate truth. But we know that truth is a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. And we also know that it was through Jesus' sacrifice that we are made worthy. We are made worthy. We are given grace because we don't deserve it. We cannot save ourselves. We need Jesus Christ to save us. That's why the end of the earlier song poem says, only Intloque Nahua can make you worthy. It was imparting a sense of grace, if you will. You know, we didn't mention grace in our book because we had so many editors and theologians and philosophers who were organized. They were like, don't even touch that, don't go there. But every time we talked to like Archbishop Corleone or different people who endorsed our books, they talk about it in terms of grace all the time. So that's just a funny thing that's behind that we laugh about. But anyway, getting back to this. So what is the key here? The key to reaching eternal life and to receiving this grace is baptism. Now, before, the indigenous people were cold and indifferent and openly hostile to baptism. But as we're going to see, they craved it and they wanted baptism. So the Christian understanding of baptism removes the barrier to eternal paradise, and they sought it by the millions.
So the way this information was shared is, if you remember an old slide where Joseph was talking about how the ancient song poems would travel throughout the land following these ancient trade routes or these courier routes. In the same way, we believe that it was converted into a song. And that song, per their tradition, would be carried and travel along those same courier routes and trade routes far off into the distance, sometimes hundreds of miles. And what's great about it is we actually have confirmation of this. We have an eyewitness account talking about the Guadalupe song. And it's describing two drummers and a singer and a multitude of dancers performing the Guadalupe song. It actually says it that way. And the way it would work is that as it's traveling, it's kind of like a computer meme because their memorization skills were so profound. I mean, the priests used to talk about it all the time. Word for word, they'd be able to memorize these long sections of songs that in the same way that was just transported far off into the hinterland, sometimes hundreds of miles. And the conversion accounts actually make a confirmation of that because most of the conversions were coming from 100 miles away, a couple hundred miles away, 300 miles away, and they were all rushing to the monastery that was closest to them, that wasn't necessarily always the Tepeyac. We only have one account that's talking about Tepeyac, but the rest of them, all of the priests, and there was only 40 of them on the ground, which kind of goes against the whole idea of forced conversions, because, you know, it's a logistical impossibility, right? But all of those people were coming over mountains and valleys. Some of them were sick. Some were lame. There was pregnant women, people carrying their houses on the back, and they're begging the priests for baptism. Even there was a period of time when there was controversy about the rubrics that the Franciscans were using. That it's a long story, but basically the Dominicans were going against the Franciscans and saying, we need to shut down the baptisms because they're not doing it the right way, right? Even during that period of time, the indigenous were coming en masse, thousands of them, to the monastery and saying, we're just going to wait. We'll wait weeks if we need to, because we need to get baptized, because if we go home and we die along the way and our souls are lost, it's going to be on your head. You actually see whole conversations in the conversion accounts. It's just really poignant and really moving, and it's very much advertising this intense desire that the priests had no clue why they wanted it. They were just happy they were there, and so they were baptizing them, right? And along with that baptism, all of the requirements that you would require of someone who's converting to Christianity, such as giving up idolatry, such as giving up your slavery, which was required, such as returning to the first wife and letting go of the concubines, letting go of the multiple wives. All of a sudden, they're willing to do it. They're begging for more penances. They're liquidating properties in order to make restitution to the slaves. All of this was to prove this. It was authentic. It was deeply sincere, even though there's been some arguments from some of the secular academics that maybe later on there was the shift. But in those first 10 years, it was profound. So profound that up to 8 to 10 million people converted. And you have these long explanations on how they made those calculations, but it did in fact happen prior to 1541. It is the most dramatic conversion event, as Joseph was saying, in the world. And along with that was even exorcisms. I mean, at that time there wasn't any set rubrics on exorcisms, but because people were being baptized, they were witnessing demons coming out of people. It was just so exponentially crazy. And this is something very unique to Our Lady of Guadalupe, which we're going to go into how we believe it applies even to today's times.
Okay, so keep in mind that the Protestant Reformation was unfolding in Europe, where about a similar number was lost. And of course, they were gained again in the Americas within a short amount of time. Now, this is a very significant, we think, an extremely significant apparition because of the preparation that it took 3,000 years. So it speaks directly to our times, however, because the chaos of the 1500s mirrors the chaos we're in right now. Back then, millions left the Catholic faith. The same is happening now. Much of the world has turned neo-pagan, actually. You should hear some of the anecdotal stories we've heard involving Guadalupe and cultic activity. It's pretty mind-blowing. So Guadalupe has even been used as part of the occult and the paranormal. And many popular TV shows, you could see her image in them. But not to lose faith, though, because Guadalupe converted the pagan cultures. She is the patroness of the Americas.
Yeah.
And we see this in the growing number of exorcisms that have spiked dramatically in the years, but have actually called upon Guadalupe for deliverance. Now, we're talking about, if we bring us back to this slide, you could see how flower world and Nahua philosophy form part one of this grand meta-narrative. That the indigenous already had a clear idea of what heaven looked like, and they were able to bridge over to the Catholic, the Christian idea. Now, As Monique was showing, they were willing to sacrifice everything to enter that heavenly flower world paradise. So, shouldn't we be willing to do the same? What are we willing to endure to reach that eternal place? From ancient times to the Guadalupe event, we see clear evidence of God intervening in human history despite human weakness, failure, confusion, resistance, and even outright defiance of His will. So this gives us hope. Today, the Basilica of Our Lady Guadalupe in Mexico City is the most visited pilgrimage site in the world, and it stands as living proof to believe in a Savior who broke the barrier to eternal life. The miraculous image on the tilma is a permanent reminder of that incredible event, the largest mass conversion in Christian history, and how God prepared the way for centuries, even millennia in advance. So it means for us today that God is still in control of history, that even in the darkest and difficult times, He is working to bring people back to Himself. Could it be that even now God is preparing hearts again? If it happened then, why not now? So thank you very much.